Welcome to the Objective Recovery podcast, where we talk about mental health very open-mindedly. Today, my guest is George Monty, who has a background in psychology. He's an author, community builder, and the founder of True Life Media. The True Life podcast has over 600 episodes and 30,000 subscribers on YouTube, engaging content that explores entrepreneurship, uncertainty, suffering, psychedelics, and evolution in the modern world. George and I first met when I spoke on his podcast in 2023. And George, you shared with me that you have been dealing with some serious illness in your family and are open to discussing it.
And first, let me just say I'm so excited to be here. I think you are a phenomenal communicator. I have huge respect for all the work you're doing, and every time I talk to you, I feel like I get to walk away a little smarter. So thank you for letting me be here and sharing some time. So for me, I'm really drawn to the objective recovery and the psychological space, and for me, the psychedelic space. And I've always had a relationship in these areas, kind of searching around, trying to find out who I am. And I've always been kind of a fan of Carl Jung and just psychedelics and the way the world works in some ways. And it's interesting, recently in my life, my wife was recently diagnosed with we thought was a stage 4 cancer. And for anybody that's finding themselves in the middle of trauma, like it happens to all of us, and it hits you like a ton of bricks sometimes. Like we were going through our lives, things were well, and all of a sudden you get this diagnosis of like, we think this might be stage 4. And for those listening, stage 4 means that you have cancer forever. There's no cure for it. We're going to help you try to survive as long as you can. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and when you get news like this, it's life-changing.
Yeah.
It's the best way to describe it. Like it fundamentally changes your life. It changes your relationships. It changes your identity. And all of a sudden, everything in your family switches from being, okay, well, we had these dreams and these goals. Oh my gosh. What if the person you love the most in the world dies? What does that mean for you as a husband? What does it mean for you as a family? What does it mean for you as a father? What does it mean for you as what does it mean for your child? What are you going to do? How much money do you have? Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And while it's incredibly overwhelming, at the same time, I found it to be kind of liberating. We can get into what that was, but that was kind of a lot there. What do you think about that? Like what's your diagnosis, or what are your thoughts on when tragedy hits people like that, Henrietta?
First of all, thank you so much for sharing all this, and I'm so sorry that this is happening. But at the same time, I'm very glad to hear the mindset that you approach this with. So, of course, just a quick question: did this happen, the diagnosis, out of the blue? You were not expecting it at all, because just to react to it, I think that is usually makes a big difference in how people deal with it. If it's like there are events leading up to a diagnosis like that, or if it's sudden.
It's a great question, and it wasn't. There were signs along the way.
Mm.
And just to add a little bit of more context to it, we were living in Hawaii at the time, and I got fired from a job I had been at for like 20 years. And so there was already a little bit of turmoil in the relationship and the direction our family was moving. And at that point in time, while going through this sort of life-changing event of losing a career, all of a sudden my wife found like, God, I have this weird sort of abnormality in my breast right here, and it went longer, and then it went longer. And then all of a sudden it got to a point where she couldn't ignore it, but we wanted to ignore it. And I think that's a part of the human condition, is not wanting to admit when there's a problem.
It's like the usual, very often the mindset is, it's just typically that these things, people are usually aware that, there is cancer out there, but the cancer happens to other people. It won't happen to us. That's I think, one typical approach to it. And probably that's what, that was her approach or attitude.
Yeah. And so we decided at this time, like circumstances dictated, like we gotta leave Hawaii. So we rented out our place in Hawaii and we moved back closer to California to be with family. And that's when my wife went into the hospital over here and got a mammogram. And she went in for a mammogram. And then it was like, we need to do an ultrasound. We need to do a biopsy. So in this one day, we went from being scared of not knowing what it is to knowing this is a huge problem. This is definitely cancer. We got the biopsy, we have everything. And then there's this sort of very uncomfortable waiting period where you have to figure out and you have to get all the lab tests back and the imaging back and figure out what it is. And this is where I think you really begin to wrestle with uncertainty and uncertainty about people you love dying. What does this mean? I don't know. I'm not an expert. What is the doctor saying? How can I trust this doctor? What are we going to do? What are the treatments plan? All these questions just rain down upon you. And all of a sudden you find yourself in the dark, like being afraid. I don't know what to do. And there was a long period of that and it caused animosity between me and my wife and my daughter and all this uncertainty. What we found is moving through this procedure, and we can get into the more details of it, but I want to tell people right now, when you find yourself in this uncertainty, when you find yourself in the dark, you just have to sit with it. And I believe that if you're willing to ask the question, what else could this mean? I think that there's real growth opportunities that can happen. For me and my wife, what began happening was this unfolding of a beautiful relationship. All of the silly things we thought about, oh, I'm going to take this car, or I'm going to take you take her to school. I made the lunch. All of this sort of scorekeeping that we were doing, it just fell away because it's not important. What important is, how much do I love my partner? What can I learn from my partner? And because these things have begun happening to us, the discussions in our life, our relationship has grown in a way that I don't think can happen unless you allow all those things to fall away. And I want people listening to this to understand, if you find yourself in a traumatic situation, it's a real opportunity to become the best version of yourself. The situation demands it. Your partner demands it. And it's a test. And so I'll leave it right there for a minute, but I hope people at least understand that there's real room for growth in times of tragedy.
Maybe not everyone would be able to react to it in this way, and very often I'm sure you have encountered many people who approach traumatic experiences with victim mindset. Means that that why this happened to me, and it's just basically completely the opposite attitude relative to what you just described. Many people just sink into a deep depression and kind of a helpless mindset because they just don't know anything else. And I think this is very often related to people's background, psychological background. And I'm sure that, I don't know you well, but I know you enough that this is not surprising to me that you reacted to it in this way, because you know what you do and how you speak. And I think that a victim mindset can be actually reinforced. You mentioned that the medic and you have to go when something like this happens. People have to go through the medical system and treatment and all that, misdiagnosis sometimes, and going in circles and all that. Many people just give up. So what you just described sounds to me that almost like very fast identity shift or identity change, but probably it was not really an identity change for the two of you. You already had that, but it's just something that normally if you are happy, we don't think about this. There can be a trauma that completely changes our lives tomorrow and what to do then. When something like this happens, then, that basically it brings out, I would say, who we really are and our real identities. These are some of the thoughts that I'm having. So again, it's very consistent with the impression that I had about you when we spoke before and what you do. This growth mindset, basically, that's the word for it. And many people don't have that. So going back to the diagnosis a bit, it appears that probably she didn't do those mammograms regularly, right?
Her particular type of cancer is HER2 negative and hormone positive. And so that's a common type of cancer, but hers, it was growing at like an unprecedented rate. It was really aggressive. And so by the time we found it, it had gone in a matter of maybe 6 months. It went from like the size of a grape to like the size of an apple, and it moved into the auxiliary lymph nodes. And so that's what made it on the cusp of stage 4 is like, okay, it appears that this particular cancer has left the region. And when it leaves the region, that's when you get into like stage 4. If it's a localized tumor, they can usually operate on it. The identity change, it was parts of it were kind of quick because so much was happening. But I want everybody listening to this, whether you're in recovery from something or you find yourself in a tragedy, it's not a linear path. If you don't move from, okay, from here to here, it's like you get really angry, you get depressed, you get upset. And then sometimes you find a little acceptance, but then you move back to anger. And then you move to acceptance. And then you move to depression. Like, it's not a linear path. So people that are listening to this, I know many of you find yourself with your own tragedies in life. Just know that it's not a linear path. And if you move back between these different states, it's okay. That's part of the process. The Kubler-Ross process is not linear. And you're going to move and you're going to shift between them. And you'll be one way and your partner will be one way. But it's imperative that you both come together and you find each other, find common ground, because that's the way forward is together. And whether it's recovery or a trauma, there's people there that have been through the exact same thing you're going through, and they will help you. A lot of people that have shown up in my life that I didn't even know that are willing to help me. And I can't see anything short of a miracle there. People I didn't even know, total strangers. George, here's something I used. Maybe this is a benefit to you. Can I send it to you? George, here's something that I heard about. Can I send this to you? Can you talk about it? There's so much community out there. And I think that that's another part of tragedy, whether it's recovery or cancer or any of these things. You will find a community of people you didn't know existed. And they're there right now. So people in this space, I've sent in you light and love and hope. The community is there. If you find yourself here, and we all do, look for that community, build that community.
So what you just described in the beginning was the stages, so the non-linear process. That's many people would compare it to stages of grief. Probably if they thought about it in that way. I think that's exactly the same because we are grieving something that used to be, and now it's a different situation. We have to accept. So you experience this as a family. Did you guys go through these stages and the processing in synchrony, or were there like conflicts or differences between how she handled it, you handled it, or your child and anyone else who was involved?
I would say that it was not in synchronicity. Like, my wife had known for a long time, and after the diagnosis, then some of the conversations came out of like, I knew it was something. And I didn't realize how much weight she was holding on to for so long, how much pain, how much the uncertainty of like, what if this is? Like, she was dealing with that all alone for 6 months.
Okay, so she actually she already knew that from self-examination that there was something growing there, but didn't share with you, didn't say anything about it?
Well, she shared with me, like, I have this I have this thing that's this bump, George.
Yeah.
I'm like, we should get it checked out. And she said, well, let's wait a little bit. Okay. But I didn't thoroughly understand how scared she was. And looking back on that, that makes me feel like a horrible husband. Like, maybe I didn't communicate enough. Like, maybe I should have been like, we need to do this now. You know what? No excuses. We're doing it now. Like, I should have done that. And like, that's an instance of the where it's not synchronicity. I didn't communicate well enough to thoroughly understand how she was feeling. But and that's also something I learned. So when she was sharing with me the way she felt up to it, all of a sudden I found myself in grief, and she was sort of becoming towards acceptance. Oh, this has happened. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I failed here. And then I start falling into this depression. And then that sparks the conversation of like, I'm so sorry. I should have been better. And it's like, you know what? Maybe I should have been better. And like, it's this imbalance on both sides that brings both people into a space where they can share with each other. But I don't think that either one of us were at the same level until we moved through this process and sort of balanced out a little bit. And that speaks to the idea of, wow, my communication with my wife now and my family is vastly superior than it used to be. And it never would have been if we didn't have this tragedy. And now, once we emerge through this, we're going to be better and stronger than we've ever been. It's a lot to think about. So no, I don't think we moved at the same time in different areas.
So I see this very often. I experienced this myself, first of all, in my own, that mine was the recovery from mental health issues, addiction, and other mental health, so not physically an illness. But it's pretty much the same process in terms of improving as a communicator. And I also, I was actually pretty horrible at communication, and many people who know me now would not believe it. But I know, because you went through this process. I went through that process too, and we just grew from it so fast and so much. This is very typical, actually, sadly, what you described in terms of blaming yourself as a partner. That happens even, children do that when relative to their parents. If, let's say, the parents as a couple, they are divorcing, or something is going in the family, very often children blame themselves. It can lead to that's a traumatic experience for them as well, and then it can lead to all kinds of problems later in their life if they don't resolve it or process it, in a healthy way. It happens as a response to a serious illness diagnosis like this. People who go through addiction recovery that I'm very familiar with as a couple, for example, many people actually, it separates them, or sometimes they grow together. They basically rediscover each other and the relationship. So that sounds like that's what happened to you guys. So I'm just saying that this is, I think, the psychological forces behind these experiences and the stages and the nonlinear processes. It's pretty universal in terms of how we react to most, pretty much any trauma that can, that changes, that threatens our lives or the lives of, our loved ones. So it's basically our lives as well. Why do you think you reacted to it in this way, that both of you, realize that this is an opportunity for growth for both of you, and separately as individuals and as a couple?
We had earlier in our marriage, my first son died. My son Ocean died.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it wasn't our first experience.
Okay.
And there was a lot of time to reflect on, after his death, what does it mean for us as a couple? And after he died, there were some really, really dark times where both me and my wife were just like, why should we even be here? We contemplate suicide. And I think it's having the courage to contemplate the very worst that gives you the strength to be the very best. Like, and a lot of the times, I know for me earlier in my life, like, we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about mental illness. We don't want to talk about suicide because it hurts. And maybe it runs in the family, and maybe it's been swept under the rug for a long time. Maybe you grew up in a home where there was abuse, whether it's mental, physical, drug abuse. Like, I know that I did. And I look back on the times that I'm ashamed of in my life. And I think to myself, wow, maybe I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't have those times in my life that I used to be ashamed of. Maybe those things I was ashamed of built some skills in. Maybe these horrible things that happened to me gave me the strength to go through what I'm going to go through now. And so for everybody listening, I think that the mindset is to look back on the things in your life that you're not proud of and try to understand what they taught you. Like, they don't have to be something you lock away with shame and guilt and never visit again. I know they're difficult to visit. Trust me, I know this. But if you find the courage to do it, you'll find there's lessons there, like real powerful lessons that can become the catalyst that allow you to move through different traumas that you never could have. Everything that happened before was who you are now. And if you're ashamed of them and feel guilty of them, try and understand. There's a great quote that says, I sat with anger so long, she told me her real name was grief. And if you can grapple with that, then you can begin to heal. And I think it's all a healing process. And that was sort of the mindset, is everything I've been through before allowed me to have the courage to ask the questions and sit with the scary thoughts about what would this mean. It's very uncomfortable to talk about death. Very uncomfortable, especially when it's someone you love. And it's very easy just to, oh, well, let's go get some food, or let's go do this thing, and not to face it. But you have to sit with it. You have to sit in the dark. That's the only way. And you have to become comfortable. So I think the mindset is just learning from the challenges in your life, and everybody has them. You can look back on the challenges you've had, and they will serve you. It will be something you can draw inspiration from. And I know that's a weird thing to think about, but it's true. So the mindset comes from that, from learning from your mistakes and having the courage to face the things you're most afraid of.
So you actually the process of going through that earlier experience with your son and this illness now. So is the other the psychological mental experience is similar for you? Okay, so you find them similar. So that's again, it just shows that it's basically these are psychological reactions to any trauma. They are pretty universal. And I think what you just shared, that drawing from earlier experiences, we can even do, in my opinion, draw from other people's experiences.
Yes.
But so in this particular situation now with this cancer, what helped you the most? What did you find most encouraging or helpful in general?
The most encouraging thing is that when you lose everything, or what you would think is everything, you lose your money, you lose your health, like you realize that you kind of have everything you need. Like if you have your family, if you have loved ones, if you have these things that we're born with, like that's enough. Like it's all of this has really changed my mindset from wanting to be seen as someone that is doing great things or having lots of money. Like, I don't care. I don't care. You know what? I want to go throw a fastball with my daughter. Me and my daughter play chess every night. And I've the whole situation, like I quit my job. I quit doing all these things that were like side hustles or making things on some level. And I try to do what's passionate now. And I want to be the best dad I can be. I want to be the best husband I can be. And like that's what matters. And it's sad to me that it took this tragedy. I'm almost 50 years old. And so it took me almost to 50 years old to realize that I neglected some of the most important things in my life. And I look back on that and I'm like, I'm so glad I'm doing it now. I'm so glad I'm doing it now. I'm not waiting another 5 years or 10 years. And it's this tragedy. It took this for me and my wife to maybe become the best versions of ourselves. And maybe that's what it's for. Maybe that's what life is. Maybe life is not about rainbows and sunshine and Instagram likes and all these things. Maybe life is about coming to the realization that you can do meaningful things with not a whole lot of resources. Like that's where community begins to build. And I've built this incredible community. And at my daughter's school, the teachers there have been instrumental in helping her walk through things that maybe she felt uncomfortable telling with us. And there's so many people willing to help you for free that want to help because they've been through something. And that inspires me and my family to want to do that for other people. So that's what's been most inspiring to me, is to realize how the world works in some ways. I'm really grateful that we have a community and our relationship is now. Like, we're not out of the water. We have a major surgery coming up. We have more chemo afterwards. There's no guarantees of what's going to happen. Will it come back? The fear of the unknown. Like, what if we get through it and then it comes back again? But you can't stay in that area. You have to think about it, but all you really have is right now. All these moments that you have right now, make the most of every one of them. Be the best person you can be, to everybody. And I promise you, your life will change. Like that's the lesson I am learning right now. And I still move back between the depression and the anger, but that's the message that's coming through me, is try to be the very best person you can. Be kind, be nice, help out other people that may not ever be able to help you. Just help them. And it'll change your life in ways that'll make you feel great about yourself.
This is exactly why many people who went through some difficult experience, myself included, with the mental health and addiction recovery from that, get to a point when, when we recover ourselves, it's resolved for us, then we want to start something that helps, is supposed to help, take it to another level beyond the self. In terms of why we need to wait like half a lifetime to develop this clarity about life and what's the meaning of life, real meaning of life. In my opinion, I'm a biologist, so I think there is actually biological programming that goes against this in when we are young, because it's just simply it's evolution. What serves evolution well, and what serves a part of evolution is reproduction, all that. What you mentioned, all the materialism.
Yeah.
That's there for a reason. That's not evil, in my opinion. It's just there because actually society needs those things as well. That we can just abandon that. I mean, some individuals can and become monks and move to the desert and do any version of this. But society, as long as it exists, those will be part of it. So I think we are just biologically programmed that, especially when we are young, we focus much more on this more materialistic type of growth goals. Most people. Then we start asking what else is out there, and even when nothing like this happens, I think people start to ask just it out of boredom. Sometimes, midlife crisis, that boredom type midlife crisis, when what else is out there. I've seen already so much. So and then if a trauma like this happens, illness or anything else, I think it can just accelerate that process, that transformation and growth process. I think I see it very similarly to also what psychedelics do to some
Yeah.
people. Probably you compare it to in your mind in that way as well, because I think it's very much, that can be very fast, how we grow.
Yeah. It would be I would be remiss to not talk about one of the most powerful tools that I use, and that's the power of psychedelics. For me, I have built a relationship with psychedelics since maybe my 17. Like I did acid once when I was 17, and I did some mushrooms, and throughout my life, like I kind of tapered off as I got older. But when my son died, I kind of rekindled that relationship, mostly in the beginning as an attempt to maybe escape. Like, oh, I remember doing these mushrooms when I was younger. I'm going to try some. And I did. And it fundamentally changed my perception of myself and what happened. And when my son died, it allowed me to see grief in a different way. Like, it allowed me to maybe see the situation for the first time without shame. I'm like, that's such a huge process. Like for me, the fear and the shame and the guilt and the what did I do wrong? How does my wife feel? Like, there was a dark period, but the psychedelics as a tool for me were something that really helped me sort of dig my way out of the dark, or allowed me to see in the dark on some level. And I began using them at that point in time, and I had like a steady relationship with them. And for those watching, the way I used them was I would take like a rather large dose. And this is for anybody out there. Like, obviously, I'm not a doctor, but I'm only sharing my experience. So if you find this is something that you want to do, you should definitely investigate it. I know there's James Fadiman has a book out, Matt Zeman has a book out. There's lots of books out there, and you can do your own research. But for me, I would do a large dose. I would do like maybe 7 grams of mushrooms. And then I would take time to integrate what I learned in that dose. Because what the psychedelics do is they allow for radical neuroplasticity. They allow for your brain to process information in different parts of your brain that they wouldn't normally get processed in. And sometimes that allows you a very unique perspective. Because you spoke about it earlier, Henrietta, and we get back in these feedback loops of just this repetitive loop, and too many of those loops are negative. So what psychedelics do, at least to my knowledge, are they allow for a pause in that loop. They allow for a different way to reimagine what happened, to have a new memory of what happened. And when you do that, you are allowed to move forward. You're allowed to see it from a different angle. The same way, like if I look at you here, I see one way, but if I stand up and I look down, I get a total different perspective. And that allows you to move forward. So I was able to use that tool with when my son died. And fast forward now, like I've had a relationship with him. I'll take a large dose maybe once a month, and then I'll follow it up with a micro dose, maybe like 100 milligrams, even smaller, maybe 20 milligrams every 3 days. Go 3 days on and 3 days off. So I fast forward here to what's going on with my wife, and that really helped me gain perspective of what my wife might think, what my family might think. How do I approach the doctors? For me, there were times where I was angry at the doctors. Like, you messed up this imaging. You don't know. There's way too many variables for you to even understand what's happening with cancer. How dare you tell me in this authoritative tone that you know what's happening? Like, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go in there and be angry and do that. But when I took psychedelics, I realized that's the wrong way to go about it. These people are trying to help you. Why would you go in with an attitude of anger and animosity? You can still ask those questions, George. And what you're really feeling, this anger, is grief. So go in with that tone. And this all came from a psychedelic journey of like understanding. Go in respectful and talk to them and point out the problems that you have. Bring up the part about the unsolved variables and how are they coming to these conclusions? Where are they getting these tests from? But psychedelics specifically, they allowed me to change the pattern of thinking from a tone of anger into a tone of curiosity. And that built a way better relationship with these doctors than I would have had I not done them. And I know that it's fringe. I know there's a stigma behind it. And I know it's not for everybody. But for me, it was right. And I want to be clear on that. Like, I think psychedelics are a phenomenal tool for people facing recovery, for people facing trauma, for rituals, for end of life, especially, maybe even for rites of passage for younger kids. This is just my opinions, but I want that to be out there. I want people to know that there is a mushroom out there that's almost free. It grows everywhere. And you can take this and you can see a different side of a situation that you normally wouldn't see in your waking awareness. It opens up your awareness to things you didn't know. So that's an incredible tool that I use and I really enjoy and I'm an advocate for. So for those thinking about doing it, do your own research, but please do the research because it's been an invaluable tool in my life and my relationships.
The mushrooms and the psychedelics are now being investigated actually formally to process illnesses. And I was personally involved as a consultant once, consulted with an academic institution that they had a study with cancer patients. It was more like terminal, with the terminal diagnosis, and so basically facing death and processing the fear of death using psilocybin.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually becoming a formal treatment, but it's still in the development and research phase. So, did you use these substances on your own, or it was also in a community setting or like therapy type setting?
Yes, and like I when I when I see the psychedelic sort of community happening, like there's a lot of people that are willing to help you. But my personal opinion is that you should do the research and maybe once do it with someone and get comfortable with it. It's like hiking on a trail on some level. Like, maybe you need someone to show you where the trailhead is, but you have to walk the trail yourself. I think that there is a lot of people out there that may not have your best interest in mind. Like, there are guides, there are coaches. I'm sure you can find a good one. My personal preference for me is to do it alone. I take I'll take 7 grams in silent darkness when I know that everybody's fine. I don't have any responsibilities. I usually do it when I have time by myself. So set and setting is imperative. Find some place where you're not going to have any sort of complications, or you're not going to have any worries. You know you're going to be fine for 5 hours, and do it alone. I think that that's where the real magic is done. I think that you don't necessarily need a guide or a coach, but you do need courage. And it's nothing to really be afraid of. If you're going to just sit in a quiet room that's comfortable, take a dose, and allow yourself the flexibility to think different. Allow the thoughts to come. And if difficult thoughts come, just sit with them. And I think that's a big part of what psychedelics do. Sometimes psychedelics make you confront things in your life that you're not proud of or not happy of. And you find yourself trying to repress it as it comes up. And you get so good at it in regular life, it happens automatically. But psychedelics will bring up traumatic events. They'll bring up things that are uncomfortable. And it won't let you suppress it. It'll just stay there. And you have to think about it. And maybe that's scary for people. It was for me sometimes. Sometimes I have scary thoughts. But I have learned that if you just sit with those thoughts, they'll eventually move on. Just hold it and it'll move. And you realize, oh my gosh, I was suppressing this thing. I should have just held it and let it go. And like so much recovery there. Like it's a brilliant way to begin understanding how you think and why you think. And you can do it alone. Like, and you're the best person. The individual is the best person to do their own therapy because you know what's wrong with you. You know what you're suppressing. You know what you don't want to talk about. It's just you haven't had the time to really sit with it. And if you think about the ways how fast society moves, so many of us don't have any time. Like you're a parent, you're a father, you're a mother, you're an aunt, you're a business person, you're a scientist, you have all these labels. When do you have time to sit down for 5 hours, and just think? Like so much will clear up. And if you build a relationship with it, maybe you do it once a month, maybe you do a microdose. But I'm a fan of doing large doses like once a month or once every 3 months, maybe once every 6 months. But build a relationship with it and you'll build a relationship with yourself. So that's the way I use it and how I think about it.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of doing it alone versus in therapy or in a social setting, I think I would say that I definitely think that doing it alone is not for everyone.
My way is not the right way. I mean, everyone's going to find their own way. Therapy is a great setting for it. I talked to lots of veterans who have sat in circles with other veterans and they've done it together. And the results for these gentlemen and these women that have been in combat and seen horrific things, a group setting with therapy followed by integration is an incredible way to move through it. And people should search it out. I think the individual will they'll find your community that we talked about earlier. For some people, they can do it alone. For other people, they may need a guide. There's no real wrong way, but it's imperative you do your research and you find good quality people that really want to help you, like Henrietta.
Thank you. Yeah, so I can completely relate to your experience because when I did psychedelics, I almost always did it on my own. There were some the exception was when I was with a friend, a close friend, but it was never a therapist setting or with an official guide. And so most of it was on my own. But I think it's maybe for people like us, I think we share this feature that we are psychologically and spiritually very curious and very open and very receptive and kind of fearless a bit, even though there is fear of death in everyone. But I think, we are very curious and many people, I think that can be a barrier that, many people just don't know how to get through that. So for them, it can be helpful to have someone else and a much more experienced person guiding. But I definitely relate because my experience is I actually found a mate, a friend there with me, very, very distracting. And I liked it, but for the most part, I didn't like it. So when I experienced it, once I experienced it on my own, I knew that this is for me, this is how it's best for me. So I can completely relate. So just figure out individually. I just would like to ask also a few questions about like practical questions because we want to also provide a practically useful content to the viewers. And you mentioned the community and how important that has been in this experience. So can you say a bit more about what type of community you guys have used, your wife, yourself, what you discovered, what is new, and have you used it?
Yeah. So for me, I had some friends that were like, I'm in a men's group, and in this men's group, I can go there and I can talk to these guys, and I was telling them a bit about my situation, and it was just a space for me to go and sort of let loose, because sometimes, you know, I don't want to tell my wife exactly what I'm thinking. I don't want to scare her. And so when we met with the doctors, they're a community. One of the oncologists was like, "Listen, George, there's things that you want to know that maybe your wife doesn't want to know. So you could talk to me, or you could talk to them, and you should definitely talk to her. And so that was one community that helped me understand maybe me looking for all these things is not helpful for my wife, but I still want to know about them. So in the men's group that I was in, I started talking to these guys about like alternative treatments and things like this. And my wife wanted to focus. You focus on that. That's fine. I'm gonna work on these things. So we found a lane to talk about. But in this men's group, I started asking them about different therapies and stuff. And this particular men's group was like, I know some people that make this, and particularly they're talking about RSO, which is a Rick Simpson oil, which is a really heavy cannabis product that has shown signs that everybody. This is not medical advice, but people may want to look at that, and it's a different way for the body to help heal different kinds of cancers and remedies. So all of a sudden, my friend there was like, I know a guy, he'll send you this stuff for free. And they did. And we used some of the things. It had pretty good results on some levels for different parts of the cancer, helping her sleep, making her feel better. And so there's two communities. I had the doctor community, and then I had this other community, the education community. There was a counselor at my daughter's school that stepped up and is like, hey, look, I would love to just help you and your family out. I would love to talk to your daughter if that's okay with you. Here's what we're going to talk about. So all of a sudden, this community at school happens. But it doesn't just stay there. An example is that the counselor at my daughter's school was helping her out. And then I would go and I talked to her a little bit, and that opened up a door for me to volunteer more at my daughter's school. I became more in tune with the teachers, with the principal. And all of a sudden, I couldn't shake the feeling that this diagnosis is opening up doors for me to become a better father at my child's school. And then there's other things working there where I've met this cool person now. And so the community aspect of it is really, it's like a human mycelium for those, or a neural network on some level. Like all of a sudden, this meandering path is opening up a door to something else. Sharing my story with other people have reached out to me and said, George, hey, thank you for sharing this story. My wife has cancer. My son has cancer. What did you do? And it's the art is in the sharing the things about yourself you're not proud of, you're afraid of, intimate details that you may think no one wants to hear about. But maybe this story you share with someone lands on them, and now they have at least an idea of something to do. You, Henrietta, opened me up to the idea of building online. And I think that also translates into talking online about things like you're not proud of or you're afraid of. And like, that's what I mean about community. Once you put yourself out there, a community will either be drawn to you or you'll be drawn to that community, and you start to find your place. And maybe you become a leader, or maybe you become a student, but you start becoming something that is bigger than just you. So that's when I think of community. I think of being part of something bigger than yourself. I guess that's when I think about community. Those are some of the ones I've been working with and what they've taught me.
Community for me, the probably the most helpful aspect of community is the feedback that you can get very fast feedback. You just mentioned that building a business in public, online, and then you get immediate feedback. In a situation like yours now, I think many people who don't utilize communities, then you are alone. You can only, have your own thoughts and your own feedback. And very often that's just loops of projection. And even if we disregard, the emotional support aspect of community, even just the objective feedback, speaking of, being objective in recovery. So the communities that you described, more for yourself, but did your wife also use communities? Did you guys do anything together?
I think for my wife's, we moved back from Hawaii, and we had spent so much time in Hawaii alone. It was just my wife, myself, and my daughter. We were over there for 18 years. So I think one of the biggest communities that my wife rekindled with was her family. She's got two sisters, and she's got aunts and uncles and her mom and dad. And we were really isolated over there. So myself included, like her family has become an incredible community for us. Like there's so much learning there. There's so much love there. There's also a lot of conversations had about what the right thing to do is. And some things we agreed with and some things we didn't. But the beauty is that the family came together and they weren't afraid to voice their opinions and their stories about people they knew that had gone through something. They weren't easy conversations at times. People would say things like, you have to do this surgery now, otherwise it's going to come back. And I'm like, we don't tell my wife that, and there is this sort of argumentative nature there, but it was all in love, and it was all in like people trying to help and share. And I think that particular community was one of the biggest communities for my wife to be part of. The doctors, my wife has had multiple sessions with a community of doctors, and it wasn't like, while there were one-on-ones, there was also like group meetings with like the surgeon, the oncologist, and we're very fortunate to have an amazing team at Kaiser over here. And they sat down with us, and they allowed us to not only talk with them, but also gave her resources to other people that had gone through this treatment. There was a girls volleyball team that came and talked to her, and they gave her like a couple of little totems that like represented other women that have gone through it before. There's a community of other people that has access to talk to, and hey, here's what stage I'm at. Here's what stage you're at. So on some level, she gets to kind of see the progression, people just finding out herself, and people that have already gone through it before. So I think that those are some of the biggest communities. And just the kindness of strangers, that will come up and start talking to you when it comes out, oh, I have cancer, oh, well, hey, can I talk to you about this? And so, yeah, she's had an unbelievable community, and she's the strongest, most beautiful woman in the world to me, and I'm so proud of her. And it's amazing to see. It's also amazing to see how her relationship with me and her daughter has changed. Like, my wife says to me some of the most profound things about life, and it's just amazing to me to get to see how beautiful vulnerability can be, and then the strength and courage that comes behind that. So
Yeah, it can be also strange also when we discover this, the power of vulnerability is that, to realize it, why did we avoid it for so long, right? Like the other topic that we discussed before, that, why do we need 50 years to arrive to start discovering the really important things in life? But it's just so interesting that, so in terms of the treatment, are the treatments still uncertain, still evolving, but what type of medical treatment she's receiving?
it can be difficult if you don't ask questions, because the doctors care. They want what's best, and they're coming off all their knowledge, and different doctors have different tools. So when we went in and we were diagnosed with this, it was presented to us in some ways that seem very authoritative, because these are real professionals that have long careers and they've seen this before. And what was presented to us is, you should do this chemo and then later do surgery. And then it was like, what if we want to do surgery first? It's probably not a good idea. And then you get into this idea of like, okay, am I fencing with an oncologist that's the top of her game for the last 30 years? Like, who am I to do that? Like, these questions arise, and you're like, I have to do it. Like, I don't know if that's a good idea. Why is that a good idea? I think we should do surgery first, and then you get into this. And like I said, the team we have is unbelievable. But I could see, at least in my own mind, I saw my ego rise up. No, this is the way to do it. I know my wife, but do I? Do I really know? And so the treatment plan is something people should really think about doing. There's something called a patient advocate, that if someone's going through this, you can get a patient advocate if you're not really, don't want to stand up and do it. But you can get someone that would go in the room with you and help explain what's going on. So what was prescribed for us was, you should do chemo all the way through for like, I think it's 16 weeks, and then do surgery. But as the treatment moves forward, there's parameters and there's checks. So she's done 4 rounds of chemo, and then they went back and did some imaging. And for us, we did the chemo, like the roughest kind of chemo you can do. I think it's called like ACS, and it's labeled the red devil, because it
Yeah.
goes in and it just it obliterates, and stops the cells from dividing. And my wife started losing her hair a little bit. There's for people going through this, there's something called a cold cap, which you can get. It's like this really ice cold cap that you put on your hair, on your head, so you don't lose your hair. So she didn't lose all of her hair, but she lost a lot. And there's a big psychological thing that happens when you see changes like that. And so the first 4 waves they're very difficult. Like, chemo is a very, very difficult process. So we did it, and my wife started feeling better. She says, "George, I can feel the tumor shrinking." And so halfway through, we went in and we got an ultrasound, and they found the cancer got bigger. That is a very, very difficult position to be in. When you're going through these things and you feel like you're getting better, and then you do this imaging, and they go, "We think it's grown." How could that be? How could that possibly be? My wife says it's getting smaller. And then all of a sudden you start thinking, maybe they missed something. And then you have another conversation with, okay, how can this possibly be? You guys told us that this is the way to go. What, now you're saying it got bigger? Well, maybe you don't know what you're talking about. And then the ego comes up again, and the uncertainty comes up again, and the difficult conversations come up again. The same for you, the same thing in recovery. Like, this is not what you told me. What we believe happened is that maybe in the initial ultrasound, they didn't pick up this other piece. Maybe it didn't grow. Maybe it's getting smaller, but they missed a piece in the initial imaging. And then all of a sudden it comes into question, well, how good is this imaging if they miss it the first time? Who are these people we're dealing with? And these are real questions, they're real concerns. And so we have another one. And after going through everything, it seems that's probably what happened. And when they looked at it again, maybe it has gotten smaller. And so now we're going to pause chemo and moving to a surgery where they're going to be able to take the tumor out of the body, remove the lymph nodes, and that doesn't come without complications. There's, problems for anemia, there's problems for nerves. That's a positive step for us. Removing the cancer from the body theoretically removes it from it being a threat to escaping a region. And so after the surgery, there's radiation. Okay, well, what does radiation do? Well, radiation is going to go in and it's going to stop these other parts from moving. But you know what else radiation does? Radiation makes it very difficult for reconstruction. And what does it mean for someone who's going to lose part of their body and maybe have it not be able to ever be reconstructed again? That's a whole nother battle. Then you find we have this incredible surgeon that we talked to, and a plastic surgeon, and he goes, you know what? We asked him these questions. Does radiation mean that you can never do reconstruction? Because that's kind of some things we're hearing. And this brilliant doctor looked at us and it makes me want to cry. Like, yeah, it makes it very difficult. But I am an optimist, and I believe we can find a way to do it. And it's not going to be from lack of not trying. Whatever you want to do, we can do. And yeah, there's stats out there that say 50 or 60% of the time reconstruction will never work. But you know what? What about those other 40% of the time? 40% of the time it works perfectly. So why would you be the 60%? Maybe you're the 1%. It's like, we'll find something. My wife gets some good news, like finally some good news, like a doctor that's an optimist. It's like, I'm an optimist. We're going to make this thing work. Like, that kind of caring compassion in times of despair. It's like a warm sunrise or a gentle hug of like, yeah, like, you listen to this person telling us like this can work. That's where we're at now. We're moving into surgery next week, and there's a set of events that come after that. And I find myself embracing in these ideas of like, each step reveals the next. Stop worrying. Like, yeah, that's good. We have these coming down the line. We don't know what's going to happen. Each step reveals the next. If you can just be here now, then you can really sort of embrace everything that's happening, be present. And so that's the recommendation we got. That's the treatment we're in. And we're halfway through right now, and we'll see what comes out of it. I'm thankful to share my story, and hopefully good thoughts will come my way from people that are listening to this, and love and light will go to people that I'm talking to.
Thank you so much. So in terms of the reconstruction, I'm sure you know that there is also the option not to do the reconstruction. Yeah. I'm just bringing this up because for people with your mindset, I see there's maybe an option that, because definitely you don't see it as a materialistic way that, that those things are so important. So that I had, for example, my cousin had a breast cancer in her 40s, and she never had reconstruction. She did all the chemo, radiation, surgery, everything, and reconstruction, and she completely recovered from it. It never came back. Now it's been like more than 20 years. So
That's awesome.
and also many people seek a second opinion, from a completely independent medical team. That's also possible to do.
Yep.
But I think I really like your attitude also in terms of questioning the doctor's diagnosis and the treatment plan, because again, people say that we need to trust the doctor. Don't consult Dr. Google. Don't search the internet. Don't ask your peers. Just trust the medical team. But the time and the energy and knowledge is also limited, and I think it's the people who actually go through it physically as well as mentally are more in a position of actually knowing on a daily basis the progression. The intuitive like insights can be very helpful even with a physical illness like this. So I think it's good to be critical about this. I have always been very critical about addiction recovery and every treatment, every modality. So the one last question I would like to ask is, so you are still in a stage when still there is a lot of uncertainty. So what do you find the most challenging right now?
It is still the uncertainty for me. Like I really want to be present, but the fear of the unknown is always there. The fear of the unknown is something that I struggle with a lot. And the only antidote to that for me is that it's just fear. You can't change it. The only thing you can change, and the antidote to the fear to me is the mindset of whatever happens, we're gonna get through it. Like we've got a brilliant team. I love you more than anything in the world. Our daughter's crushing. She's amazing. And when I think about that fear of the unknown, what I try to do is sort of lean into it. Like, yeah, you don't know what's gonna happen. But you know what? Maybe what's happening in your family right now is going to be the catalyst for your daughter to understand empathy in a way that you can't imagine. Maybe these trials that you've already looked at in your life and you went, oh God, my son dying was the worst thing ever happened. But it also allowed something to be born inside of me that I never could have had. Maybe what you're going through is preparing you to become the very best version. Maybe it's going to ripple outward. Maybe you going through this trauma and your wife going through this trauma and telling people about it is going to help someone else. So the fear for me is hard and the uncertainty is hard, but leaning into it and understanding what can come of it is the antidote to that on some level. That's the most challenging part. And I try to lean heavy into it because I think there's so much good that can come out of it and it can help other people. And the lessons our family is learning are going to pay dividends that no one can imagine in the future.
It's the realization that the fear is not the enemy, right? I just want to give you again a feedback on this, that you have a incredible growth mindset. Even when I ask you about what is your biggest challenge, you just mention the challenge, and immediately, without being asked, you move into how you grow from it. So and much more that way. So it just shows who you are. So thank you very much, George, for sharing all this today. That I'm sure that it will help people, that many people who go through this, both physically and mentally. And I think it's a wonderful conclusion that, we don't need to be afraid of fear. I definitely wish you all the best and luck and, everything that this experience needs, and resilience. You definitely sound extremely resilient, both of you as well. So it's just good to hear in a sad way, of course. So thank you again.
Perfect. Thank you, Henrietta, for helping me and giving me a platform to talk to. And I think that what you're doing with objective recovery and going out there and helping people and sharing what you've been through. I think it speaks volumes of your character. And I think you're an amazing human being. And I'm grateful to get to spend some time with you and talk to you. And everyone should tune in to you coming on my podcast in a few weeks. And so I'm really excited. I'm really thankful for you and all the work you're doing. So thank you, Henrietta, for everything.